I knew something was wrong when I woke up from surgery and saw 17 missed calls on my phone. The anesthesia made my head foggy, but even through the haze I recognized that this wasn't normal. Nurse Olivia was checking my vitals when I finally managed to unlock my screen. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my frown. "I don't know," I said, scrolling through the call history. Most were from my neighbor Fred, but there were also 3 from my boss and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. Something's happened. Before I could call Fred back, my phone lit up with an incoming call from him. I answered, my mouth still dry from the anesthesia. "Zach? Thank God. Are you all right?" Fred's normally calm voice was strained with worry. "Just got out of surgery. What's going on?" There was a pause on the other end. "Patricia Keller had your car towed this morning. I tried to stop them, told them you were in the hospital, but she wouldn't listen. Said rules were rules." I closed my eyes, the full weight of the situation sinking in. Patricia Keller, the president of our neighborhood's HOA and the bane of my existence for the past 3 years. And now, while I was having a tumor removed from my spine, she decided to have my car towed. "Which violation?" I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew. "The expired registration sticker. I told her you had the new one, that it was probably sitting in your mailbox since you've been dealing with your health issues, but she just gave me that smile. You know the one." I did know. That smile that said she knew exactly what she was doing and enjoyed every second of it. "Thanks, Fred. I'll handle it when I get home." I hung up and leaned back against the hospital pillows, my incision site throbbing with fresh pain that had nothing to do with the surgery. Little did I know that this wouldn't be a simple matter of retrieving my car and paying a fine. This would be the beginning of the end for Patricia Keller's reign of terror, and her career. I'm a small business owner. I run a local print shop that's been in my family for 2 generations. After serving 8 years in the Army, I came home to take over when my dad's arthritis got too bad. It's a good life, but not an easy one, especially these past few months with my health problems. I bought my modest 2-bedroom house in Pine Ridge Estates 5 years ago. The neighborhood seemed perfect: quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and friendly neighbors. The HOA fees were reasonable, and the rules didn't seem overly restrictive. That all changed when Patricia Keller won the HOA presidency 3 years ago. A middle-aged real estate agent with a helmet of blonde highlighted hair and a constant scowl, she transformed our once pleasant community into her personal kingdom. Under Patricia's leadership, violation notices multiplied like rabbits. Grass half an inch too high? That's a fine. Trash can visible from the street for more than 12 hours? Another fine. Garden gnome not pre-approved by the architectural committee? You guessed it, fine. I'd managed to stay mostly off her radar until 6 months ago when I replaced my front door. The new door was the exact same style as the old one, just not weathered and cracked. But apparently, the shade of brown was chestnut instead of the approved mahogany, and Patricia slapped me with a $150 fine. When I appealed, showing up to the meeting with paint samples proving the colors were nearly identical, Patricia just smiled that cold smile and said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Archer. We can't make exceptions." From that moment on, I felt her watching my property, waiting for the slightest infraction. And now, while I was unconscious on an operating table, she'd found one. 2 days after surgery, my neighbor Fred drove me home from the hospital. I was still in considerable pain, moving slowly with a walker the physical therapist had insisted I use for at least a week. "I can take you to get your car tomorrow," Fred offered as he helped me inside. "The towing company is across town, McGregor's." "Thanks," I said, lowering myself carefully onto my couch. "But first I need to check something." I asked Fred to bring in my mail, which had accumulated during my hospital stay. As I suspected, among the bills and flyers was an envelope from the DMV containing my new registration sticker. "Dated 3 days ago," I said, showing Fred the postmark. "It arrived while I was already in pre-op." Fred shook his head. "That woman is something else. Want me to call her?" "No," I said. I need to handle this myself. After Fred left, promising to check on me in the morning, I took one of my pain pills and made some calls. First to McGregor's Towing, where I learned it would cost $275 to retrieve my car, plus $50 for each day it remained in their lot. Then to my doctor's office to get documentation of my surgery. And finally, to my cousin Penny, who happens to be a lawyer. "This is harassment, Zach," Penny said after I explained the situation. "She knew you were having surgery. The whole neighborhood knew. Can I fight it?" "Absolutely. Document everything. I'll help you draft a letter to the HOA board. But for now, you need to rest and recover." That night, as I drifted off to sleep, my phone dinged with a text. It was from an unknown number. "I hear you're home from the hospital. Perhaps now you'll have time to address your violations. Welcome back. PK." She had my personal cell number. How did she get my personal cell number? I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, Fred drove me to McGregor's Towing to retrieve my car. The owner, a burly man named Mike, seemed genuinely apologetic when I showed him my hospital wristband and discharge papers. "That HOA lady was insistent," he said, shaking his head. "She called 3 times to make sure we picked it up right away." "Did she mention I was in surgery?" I asked. Mike looked uncomfortable. "She said something about how medical issues don't exempt people from following the rules." "I'm sorry, man. If I'd known the full story." I paid the $375 fee with my credit card, wincing at the expense. With medical bills piling up, this was the last thing I needed. On our way back to my house, Fred filled me in on neighborhood gossip I'd missed. "Patricia's on a rampage lately. She fined the Johnsons for having their grandkids' bikes visible in the driveway overnight. And old Mrs. Winters got cited because her Christmas lights were still up on January 3rd. The woman is 87. Someone needs to stand up to her," I said. Fred glanced at me. "Good luck with that. Her husband Lawrence is some big-shot executive at Midstate Insurance. They've got money and connections. Everyone has a weakness," I replied, an idea beginning to form in my mind. When we arrived at my house, a white envelope was taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA. Not only was I being fined $200 for the expired registration sticker, but I was also being assessed an additional $150 for failure to maintain property, because my lawn had grown too tall during my hospital stay. "This is ridiculous," Fred said, reading over my shoulder. "You were having spinal surgery, for God's sake." I folded the notice carefully and tucked it into my pocket. "Would you mind helping me with something, Fred? I need to make some copies." 2 days later, I felt strong enough to attend the monthly HOA meeting. I arrived early, setting up my walker and easing into a chair in the community center meeting room. Several neighbors came over to ask about my surgery and express sympathy about my car. "It wasn't right," whispered Elaine Thompson, a retired teacher who lived across the street. "We all tried to tell her you were in the hospital." Patricia arrived precisely at 7 p.m., dressed in a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, her husband Lawrence trailing behind her like an expensive shadow. She faltered slightly when she saw me but quickly recovered, offering a thin-lipped smile. "Mr. Archer, how nice to see you up and about. I trust you've taken care of your violations?" "That's actually why I'm here," I said, matching her smile with one of my own. The meeting proceeded with its usual tedium: budget reports, discussions about the upcoming community yard sale, and approval of last month's minutes. Finally, we reached the open forum portion, where residents could address concerns. I raised my hand. Patricia's eyes narrowed, but she had no choice but to acknowledge me. "The floor recognizes Zachary Archer," she said, her voice clipped. I slowly stood, leaning on my walker. "Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to address what I believe is a pattern of selective enforcement and harassment by the current HOA leadership." A murmur ran through the room. Patricia's perfectly made-up face hardened. "Mr. Archer, if you have specific complaints, there's a proper form for," I'm exercising my right to speak during open forum, as outlined in our bylaws. I interrupted, pulling out a copy of said bylaws and holding it up. Section 4, Paragraph C. Lawrence Keller shifted in his seat, whispering something to his wife. She silenced him with a look. As many of you know, I was hospitalized last week for spinal surgery. During that time, while I was literally unconscious, Mrs. Keller ordered my car to be towed for having an expired registration sticker, a sticker that had already been mailed and was sitting in my mailbox. I passed around copies of my hospital documentation and the dated envelope from the DMV. Furthermore, I was fined for not mowing my lawn while I was hospitalized. I'd like to ask the board, is this consistent with the community standards we want to uphold? Several board members looked uncomfortable. One, a retired judge named Walter Simmons, cleared his throat. Patricia, did you know Mr. Archer was having surgery when you issued these violations? Patricia's smile never faltered. Rules apply equally to everyone, Walter. We can't make exceptions based on personal circumstances. Where would we draw the line? At basic human decency, perhaps? Suggested another board member, Rebecca Gwynn, to scattered applause. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. If we start making exceptions, property values will suffer. I'm merely protecting our investments. I pulled out another set of documents. Speaking of investments, I've done some research into the towing company that Mrs. Keller exclusively contracts with. Patricia suddenly stood. This is outside the scope of this meeting. We need to move on. McGregor's Towing, I continued, ignoring her interruption, has towed 17 vehicles from our neighborhood in the past 6 months, generating over $5,000 in fees. Interestingly, the company is owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Lawrence Keller's face had gone pale. That's a lie, Patricia snapped. I handed copies of business registration documents to the board members. Public record. McGregor's Towing is owned by Robert Keller, who is married to Lawrence's sister, Mary Ann. Not once did Mrs. Keller disclose this conflict of interest when arranging this exclusive contract. Walter Simmons studied the documents, his expression grave. Patricia, is this true? Before she could answer, I added, and that's not all. I've compiled a record of every fine issued under Mrs. Keller's presidency. There's a clear pattern of selective enforcement against certain homeowners, particularly those who have opposed her in board elections or questioned her decisions. I distributed another set of documents, a detailed spreadsheet showing 3 years of HOA violations, who received them, and their history with Patricia. This is harassment, plain and simple, I concluded. And in my case, it borders on discrimination against someone with a medical condition. Patricia's composure finally cracked. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she hissed. My husband will want to distance himself from this as quickly as possible, I interrupted, pulling out one final document. Especially given that Midstate Insurance, where he's a vice president, has a very strict policy against conflicts of interest and associated reputational risks. I took the liberty of requesting their corporate ethics guidelines. The color drained from Lawrence Keller's face. He whispered urgently to Patricia, who shoved his hand away. I move that we immediately suspend Mrs. Keller from her position pending a full investigation, said Walter Simmons, looking around the room. All in favor? Every hand except the Kellers went up. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, Lawrence trailing behind her. She stopped beside my chair. This isn't over, she whispered. I smiled calmly. Actually, Patricia, I think it is. What I didn't tell her was that I had even more evidence I'd be sharing with authorities, not just the HOA board. But that could wait for tomorrow. The next morning, I woke to frantic knocking at my door. It was Rebecca Gwynn from the board, her eyes wide with excitement. Have you seen the news? She asked as I invited her in. I shook my head, reaching for my phone. Lawrence Keller has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, she said, unable to contain herself. And there's a reporter from the Tribune asking questions about HOA practices in Pine Ridge Estates. I smiled, opening the local news website on my phone. There it was, a small headline, but significant. Insurance executive under investigation for alleged ethics violations. How did they find out so quickly? Rebecca asked. I shrugged innocently. News travels fast. What I didn't mention was the anonymous email I'd sent to both Mid-State's Ethics Compliance Office and a journalist friend at the Tribune after the meeting. Attached were copies of all my documentation, plus something I hadn't revealed at the meeting, bank statements showing transfers from McGregor's Towing to Patricia's personal account, which my cousin Penny had helped me obtain legally through a contact at the bank who was concerned about potential fraud. The board is calling an emergency meeting tonight, Rebecca continued. Walter thinks we should do a full audit of the HOA finances. That sounds prudent. I agreed, wondering if they'd discover what I already suspected, that the Kellers had been skimming from the HOA funds for years. After Rebecca left, promising to keep me updated, I called my cousin Penny. You stirred up quite a hornet's nest, she said, sounding impressed. The district attorney's office just contacted me. They want to talk to you. About? Apparently, your situation opened a floodgate. 3 other homeowners associations in the county have members coming forward with similar complaints about the same towing company. They're looking at a potential pattern of kickback schemes. I leaned back on my couch, feeling a mix of satisfaction and wariness. Do I need to worry about retaliation? Not from Patricia, Penny said. She's got bigger problems now. But come by my office this afternoon. We should prepare your statement carefully. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity in Pine Ridge Estates. The emergency HOA meeting revealed that Patricia had been misappropriating funds for years, everything from inflated landscaping contracts with her friends' companies to unauthorized, administrative expenses that somehow always benefited the Kellers. Walter Simmons was elected interim president, with Rebecca Gwynn as his vice president. Their first order of business was to cancel the contract with McGregor's Towing and issue apologies to everyone who had been unfairly targeted under Patricia's leadership. My medical recovery progressed steadily. Neighbors I barely knew before offered to help with groceries, mow my lawn, or just stop by for company. It seemed Patricia's reign of terror had inadvertently created a stronger community spirit among those she had victimized. 3 weeks after the fateful HOA meeting, I received a certified letter from the HOA's newly hired accounting firm. They had determined that I was due a refund of $1,275 for improperly assessed fines over the past 3 years. Similar letters went out to dozens of other homeowners. But the real bombshell dropped a month later. I was at my print shop, finally back to work part-time, when Fred called. Turn on Channel 8 News right now, he said without preamble. I pulled up the local news live stream on my computer just in time to see Patricia and Lawrence Keller being escorted in handcuffs into the county courthouse. The headline below read, Former HOA President and Insurance Executive Charged with Fraud, Embezzlement. According to the news report, the investigation that started with our HOA had expanded dramatically. The district attorney had uncovered a complex scheme involving multiple homeowners associations, the towing company, and several vendors. The Kellers had allegedly been running a kickback operation that netted them over $200,000 over the past 3 years. More shocking still, the investigation had revealed that Patricia had used her position at her real estate agency to access homeowners' personal information, including phone numbers and financial details, explaining how she'd gotten my cell number and known exactly when to strike with violations. Later that afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was a reporter from the Tribune. Mr. Archer, I understand you were the one who initially exposed Patricia Keller's activities. Would you be willing to comment for our story? I thought about it for a moment. I'm just a small business owner who got tired of being bullied, I finally said. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. After I hung up, I received a text from my neighbor Fred. Guess what? Lawrence Keller was fired today. Mid-State issued a statement distancing themselves completely from the alleged criminal activities of their former VP. I smiled, remembering Patricia's threat. This isn't over. She was right, but not in the way she'd intended. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Estates held its annual community picnic in the park at the center of our neighborhood. It was a perfect early fall day, with children playing on the recently upgraded playground equipment, paid for with recovered funds from the Keller's scheme, and neighbors chatting over plates of potluck dishes. My back had healed well, though I still used a cane on days when the pain flared up. Today was a good day, and I moved easily among my neighbors, many of whom now greeted me as a friend rather than just another face in the community. Walter and Rebecca had transformed the HOA into what it should have been all along, a true community organization focused on bringing neighbors together and maintaining our shared spaces, not punishing people for minor infractions. "Zach! Come see this!" called Fred, waving me over to where a small crowd had gathered around someone's phone. It was a news alert from the county courthouse. Patricia and Lawrence Keller had both pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against others involved in their schemes. Patricia would serve 18 months in prison, while Lawrence received probation and community service. "Guess who's been ordered to perform his community service hours?" Fred asked with a grin. "Roadside cleanup on County Highway 16. I laughed at the irony. County Highway 16 was the road where McGregor's Towing had taken my car, and where they'd taken so many others on Patricia's orders. Later, as the picnic wound down and the sun began to set, Walter Simmons raised his glass in a toast. "To Pine Ridge Estates," he said. "And to neighbors who look out for each other, especially when they're in surgery." Everyone laughed and clinked their glasses. Rebecca sidled up next to me. "You know," she said quietly, "there's going to be an opening on the board next month when Walter's term ends. You should consider running." I smiled, looking around at the community I'd helped transform. "Maybe I will." As I drove home that evening, I passed the "Welcome to Pine Ridge Estates" sign at the entrance to our neighborhood. Someone had added a small, hand-painted addition beneath the formal lettering. "Where rules are rules, but people come first." I smiled and turned into my driveway, where my car, with its properly displayed registration sticker, sat safely parked. No tow trucks in sight.